Imagine a life where every loss, every unexpected change, every forced letting go feels not like a catastrophe, but like a homecoming. A state where you are not shaken by circumstance because you have already, willingly, released your grip on everything you were holding. This is not a fantasy of indifference, but a discipline, and it finds its most potent expression not in modern psychology, but in the ancient razor-edge philosophy of the samurai. We begin not with acquisition, but with a deliberate, systematic practice of abandonment. Our story is set in a modern city, in a life that appears, from the outside, to be one of mastery. A man named Kenji had built a fortress of his identity. He was the reliable director at his firm, a title earned through 15 years of meticulous work. He was the owner of a specific model of German automobile, a symbol he maintained with pride. He was a man of strong, well-researched opinions on politics, on art, on the right way to live, and he engaged in debates not to learn, but to defend these positions. Kenji's life was a collection of such comforts, securities, and convictions. Then, the corporation was restructured, and his position was made redundant. The fortress did not just develop a crack, it seemed to dissolve into mist. The ensuing grief was not merely for the job, but for the entire structure of self that had been built upon it. He was not just unemployed, he was undefined. This total collapse mirrors the samurai's ultimate confrontation with mortality on the battlefield. In that moment, clinging to the hope of survival was a sure path to a hesitant, fatal mistake. Thus, they cultivated a principle known as Sutemi, Shen, which translates to abandoned body. It is the spirit of total commitment, of throwing one's entire being into an action without any thought of holding back, without reservation for the self. The legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi embodied this in his strategy. He wrote in the Dokudo, "Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling." Total victory required total release. For Kenji, and for us, the modern battlefield is not physical, but psychological. Our attachments are our comforts, our rigid opinions, our fragile identities. We are not asked to abandon our lives, but we can train to abandon our grip on them. Chapter 1. The Armor of Attachment. Kenji's suffering after his job loss was profound because it targeted what he was most attached to. He had, without realizing it, followed a path common to us all. We seek security, and we find it in external forms. A stable career, a certain social status, possessions that signal our worth, and a set of beliefs that make the world feel predictable and ourselves feel wise. The samurai understood this trap. They called the ordinary mind that clings and craves and fears the mono no aware, the poignant sensitivity to the impermanence of things. While beautiful in art, this clinging is a fatal weakness in a crisis. In his quiet despair, Kenji stumbled upon the works of the Zen monks who influenced the warrior class. He read of the concept of Mujo, Wu Chang, the inescapable truth of impermanence. Everything changes, every dynasty falls, every castle crumbles, every cherry blossom scatters. His crisis was not an error in his life's plan. It was the inevitable expression of this fundamental law. His armor of attachment had not protected him. It had only made the blow heavier when it finally landed. Chapter 2. Sutemi. The Discipline of Release. The revelation was not comforting at first. It was terrifying. If everything is impermanent, then is any effort worthwhile? But here, the warrior philosophy makes its crucial turn. It does not advocate for passive nihilism, but for active, disciplined release. Sutemi is not a state you find yourself in during disaster. It is a muscle you train in times of calm. The great masters did not wait for the battle to practice non-attachment. They integrated it into their daily lives through austere rituals. The tea ceremony, where a precious bowl is handled with care, yet with the understanding it may already be broken. The constant meditation on death, not as morbidity, but as a tool to polish the mind. Kenji realized his error. He had spent a lifetime in the practice of acquisition and defense. He had never once practiced the art of voluntary release, and so he designed a new regimen. He called it the practice of abandonment. The rule was simple, yet profound. Each week, he would voluntarily and consciously abandon one comfort, one opinion, or one security. Chapter 3. The Weekly Ritual of Abandonment. The first week, his practice was small, almost trivial. He decided to abandon his comfort of always having the final word in discussions with his partner. He would state his view once, clearly, and then consciously release his attachment to being right. He would listen, truly listen, without preparing his rebuttal. Internally, this felt like a form of surrender, a loss of control. He noted the anxiety it sparked, the slight tension in his jaw as he held his tongue. That was the point. He was not changing his opinion, he was dissolving his identification with it. The second week, he abandoned a security. He drove his prized car to a distant part of town and used public transportation for 3 days. He observed the slight embarrassment he felt waiting for the bus, the irrational fear of being seen as lesser. He was abandoning the symbol and feeling the raw space left behind. The third week, he abandoned a physical comfort. He turned off the heating in his study for an evening, sitting with the chill, watching his mind generate complaints and justifications for turning it back on. He did not. He simply sat with the sensation, letting the desire for warmth arise and pass without yielding to it. Chapter 4. The Forging of the Empty Mind. As the weeks turned into months, Kenji's practice deepened. He abandoned larger things, a long-standing grudge against a colleague, which felt like relinquishing a piece of his own history. He abandoned the security of a predictable weekly schedule, introducing blocks of unstructured time that his mind initially screamed was wasteful. With each release, a pattern emerged. There was a moment of resistance, a fear of a void, a grief for the lost thing. Then, after holding firm, a quiet expansion. Letting go of being right created space for genuine connection. Letting go of certain comforts revealed a dormant resilience in his own body. The samurai sought the state of mushin, wu-shin, the no mind. A mind not empty of thought, but empty of fixation, like still water that clearly reflects whatever comes before it. Kenji was not becoming a hollow man. He was forging a flexible one. His opinions became preferences he could hold lightly. His comforts became conveniences he could enjoy but not depend upon. His identity was no longer a fortress, but a flowing stream. Chapter 5. When the storm arrives, unannounced. The true test of any discipline comes not in practice, but in unscripted application. A year into his regimen, Kenji received news that his father had fallen seriously ill, requiring him to leave the city for an indefinite period to become a caretaker. The old Kenji would have been shattered. His mind would have been a storm of anguish over his disrupted career plans, anxiety over finances, and resentment over the unfairness. The new Kenji felt the wave of shock, the deep sorrow for his father. But he then observed something remarkable. There was no secondary storm. There was no internal fortress to be shattered, because he had already dismantled it, piece by voluntary piece. His practice of abandonment had trained him in Sutemi. He could now throw his entire being, his time, his attention, his resources, into this new, demanding role without the crippling grief for the life he had to release. He pivoted, not with the stiffness of obligation, but with the fluidity of commitment. He was, in that moment, the modern embodiment of the abandoned body spirit. The practice of abandonment is the deliberate cultivation of freedom. It is the recognition that our strength is not measured by the weight of what we carry, but by the ease with which we can set it down. We begin by mistaking our possessions, our titles, and our convictions for ourselves. We end by understanding they were only ever borrowed tools, to be used with respect and released without regret when their time is past. This is the warrior's way. It is not a path of acquiring an invincible self, but of realizing the self was the very thing you needed to abandon. Start not with what you must lose, but with what you dare to release. 1 week, 1 comfort, 1 opinion at a time. In that continual voluntary release, you will find not emptiness, but a capacity for life that is absolute, unshakable, and profoundly free. Throughout the story of Kenji, you learn that true resilience is not built by accumulating strength, but by systematically practicing release. You saw how the ancient principle of Sutemi, total commitment through total surrender, is not just for the battlefield, but for the mind. You discovered that non-attachment is not a passive state, but an active discipline, a weekly ritual where you voluntarily let go of a comfort, an opinion, or a security to forge a spirit that is fluid, flexible, and free. Now, the practice passes to you. What is the one comfort, one small opinion, or one minor security you could choose to abandon this week? Share your first deliberate act of release in the comments below. Let that be the start of your own discipline. If this path of disciplined strength resonates with you, consider commenting and subscribing for more explorations into the timeless principles that shape an unwavering mind. Thank you for your time and attention. Until next time.